Hello, everybody. I guess we'll get started here. First, I want to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Ben Tilburg. I'm a land manager here in Wisconsin, and I currently manage 4 different states in a sense: Wisconsin, the southern half of Minnesota, Iowa, and the northern half or northern end of Missouri. Pifer's Land Management manages land in the upper Midwest, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Missouri. Ideally, like we all discuss, the farm is a family's legacy, whether that be in a trust that's formed in order to protect the land, or whether that be in a landowner themselves or an absentee landowner. A lot of folks invest in land throughout their careers and enjoy the rewards of cash rent as a sustainable income in their retirement. So, talk a little bit about Pifer's land management growth. Pifer's, like I said, currently manages about 230,000 acres of farmland. We have seen a significant increase over the last 2 years and expect that to continue. I say that as we're approaching a massive transition of land and wealth in the United States, from the baby boomers starting to retire, farmers starting to pass on their tradition, or maybe their generation, their younger generation isn't interested in farming. So one way that that next generation may not have that opportunity, however, their kids may want to farm that farm in the future. So a lot of folks have put their land in a trust, which allows a company like ourselves to manage that trust, sustain income to the beneficiaries in that trust, and then allows that decision to be made further on down the line that, maybe one of the grandkids says, Grandpa, I want to farm, when I get older. And, after that farm has been managed efficiently and prudently by a management company like ourselves, like Pifer's, that grandson, when he reaches that age and the trust says it can be dissolved or however managed, rented, or whatever that means, then the next generation can farm and the tradition continues. So just because the land itself isn't going to be farmed by a certain generation doesn't mean that it can't stay in the family, and that's pretty important. Cropland acres cash rent varies depending on crop. I think we all know the revenue changes on a crop. However, during the negotiation process, for us anyways, we talk about, what crops are going to be farmed on this land, and, what are the opportunities there. And, one of the things we've been able to do is kind of narrow that opportunity within a cash lease. So if someone says, I said I was going to grow corn, but now I'm going to grow kidney beans this year. Well, kidney beans is a huge opportunity for the land owner and for the tenant for an increase in revenue. In fact, in Wisconsin, just the other day, I saw a sign on highway or on Interstate 39 that said Chippewa Valley Bean is looking for more acres in Wisconsin, and they're ready to sign contracts with farmers. So increased opportunities means opportunities for landowners. Revenue changes based on the crop you grow. Just like if you had a pasture, it obviously brings a little less revenue. However, high value crops, whether it be vegetable crops or kidney beans or sugar beets or potatoes or whatever that may be, brings a lot more value as cash value to the landowner. Hunting leases is something that we've really expanded here in Wisconsin. Typically, you get in North Dakota, out west, there's a lot less trees and opportunities. Maybe there's some pheasant hunting land, which is phenomenal. However, In Wisconsin, most of our farmland in most areas has woods attached to it, and there's deer and rabbits and squirrels and pheasants and grouse, and there's a lot of hunting opportunities there. So hunting has really been a great value-added income for our company. In fact, we manage over 2,500 acres of hunting land in Wisconsin, and that's a pretty good sustainable added value rental income. In fact, on some properties, the added value of hunting leases pays for the cost of land management on their agricultural land. So it's just a good, diverse, phenomenal way to add to that portfolio. Like I talked a little bit about before, the land that we manage, tillable, crop, irrigated, we have currently right now, I manage over 2,000 acres of irrigated land in Wisconsin. I got a small parcel in Minnesota that's irrigated, but we are very well versed in the management of those irrigators, whether that be by the tenant or who's responsible for the maintenance. At what point does the landowner pay for repairs, and at what point does the tenant pay for repairs? And that's a pretty important conversation to have when you're discussing contracts, because that could swing thousands and thousands of dollars. Just this last year, we had a piece of irrigated ground, and our landowner's irrigator got hit by lightning. There's a number of different things that happen when irrigators get hit by lightning. And so who pays for what? Obviously you have electricity rolling through there that damages a lot of things. And so there's a lot of different, very complex conversations and very sensitive conversations relating to money that need to be had. And really that lies into making sure you have the right setup in your contract. Pasture land, we have, that's pretty much scattered across a lot of our land management. It's a diverse part of farmland portfolio for a number of my clients. A certain percentage is in pasture compared to tillable and irrigated land, mainly because some of that ground may not just be the best ground to till up, whether it be rocks in it, whether it's got the infrastructure with fence and water and electricity. There possibly could be buildings on site where they're that are used, and that also needs to be put into the lease. CRP, folks often forget that CRP, there is management that takes place with CRP, whether it be enrolling it, getting it planted, mid-contract management, whether that be a burn or a mowing, and then identifying potential issues with that CRP moving through the contract. So communication through FSA and is pretty important, because you'd hate to have to pay all that money back if the government said you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Farmsteads, grain sites, we have a number of grain bin sites that we lease out, sometimes to tenants that are farming the land of our landowners, and also other, grain sites that are leased out by neighboring farms, or even sometimes farms in a different county. This last year we had some interesting circumstances where folks were running out of storage. Elevators always like to dangle that carrot of, free storage, and that usually means commodity prices are going up, and they can handle moving grain at a very fast pace. Generally, it doesn't happen like this during harvest like it did this last year. Normally the price kind of trails off a little bit and then comes back up in April. However, we've seen some unusual circumstances, and I think this fall will present the same. Grass and supporting acres, there's a lot of bordering pieces, whether it be dry land on the corners that folks aren't interested in farming, or along woods, buffer strips. For example, in Minnesota, there's a law that says, there's a buffer strip law that you have to have grass planted near lakes, streams, and rivers to buffer that ground from pesticides and fertilizers entering the water system. So those acres have to be managed. Hay is a different. There's some tougher ground out there that has been in hay for quite a while. We're just involved in a process of transitioning some of that hay ground into tillable crop ground. And what does that take, and what kind of contract would you need in order to make that happen? Obviously, the tenant has invested or is planning on investing significant resources into getting that ground back up nutrient-wise in the soil to farm. Most likely on this farm that we're working at, the land will be no-tilled the first year and managed appropriately afterwards. And then hunting, we already talked about. That's another good opportunity for a hunting lease. Take care of that. So top reasons to use a land manager or a farmland manager. Represent landowners to help them meet their goals and objectives. More often now, I'm getting a lot of questions about sustainable practices, about carbon, about cover crops, about no-till. And landowners are interested in making sure that their soil meets certain expectations and guidelines. And while that's not new, it has increased. And landowners, farmers, they all know that there's opportunity in the soil. And if we don't take care of the soil, whether it be by increasing, residue content or tillage practices, we may have some negative repercussions in the future. Take, for example, they call it blackout, but in the fall, if you black out your ground, you till it in the fall. And while that seems to be a very benign, not necessarily an issue in some areas, take, for example, Red River Valley, or even in the Central Sands area here in Wisconsin, where you get a late snowfall and everything's been tilled and we get 50-mile-an-hour winds. Talk about soil loss and some of the really the challenges that we face through soil loss can be a very very daunting number if you actually take a look at the science. Another top reason to use a farm manager is that we manage continuity. Continuity, flow, relationships, it's a very, very important part of the process. The relationship with the tenant and the farmland manager, there's a lot of respect that goes into it. Nobody's trying to pull any wool over anybody's eyes. We're on a level playing field. We're both experts in our field, so to speak, where we can talk frankly about, crops and inputs and commodity prices and come to an agreement in the end. I think the more information we know about how the land is being farmed and who's taking care of it really leads to better decisions in the future. And that goes along with the consistent communications like we just talked about. And those communications don't just flow through the farmland manager and through the land or the tenants. They flow back to the landowner too. We typically call and update our landowners often when we have, especially during negotiations. And in fact, the landowner is the one that approves the final number with obviously some explanation from the farmland manager on what that entails, what's in the contract, what are those conversations, how that relates to a cash rent, and what that means, what the duration is. Removing the anxiety of negotiating between landlord and tenants, that's huge. A lot of this land has been farmed together with neighbors for a very long time. Some of this land that transitions from land that's being farmed is then rented out to neighbors or family and friends. That conversation becomes stressful. The way I look at it is you've invested in your land your whole entire life. It is your 401k. It is your investment, and when you're in retirement and you're trying to live off that investment, you need to get a market rent for that land. You need to get a fair price. No, we don't need to get the top rent. That's not our goal, but a fair price. I look at it this way with the stock market is you don't give your stock investor a great deal because they're your friend or family, right? It's a business transaction. And I think land should be no different. Land is a business transaction between your investment and a return on your investment. And I think that conversation, once it becomes business, and that's why hiring a land manager from Pifer's really works well, because that conversation becomes business. It's no longer about relationships. And not to say that relationships aren't important, because they are absolutely at the top of the list. But that relationship becomes a business relationship of respect and care, and care for the land and respect, and becomes a business transaction. Kind of removes that anxiety from the landowner with their family and friends. That third party can ask important questions between both parties. So just something to think about and remember. Disciplined payment structure. We enforce our payments promptly and efficiently up in the spring of every year. We rarely do split payments unless they're a flex payment or something of that nature. Contract integrity, terms, rates, and practices. Pifer's has really developed a contract which spells out very clear terms and rates, and identifies practices and goals that the landowner has set forth for that land. These conversations leading up to this contract are so important. How is it being farmed in the past? What are the yields? And having a full picture of moving forward. Well, maybe this land needs lime, for example. How are you going to handle that? So these conversations that come down to soil and nutrients are so important. Market and commodity pricing opportunities. Farmland managers, we track it every day. We look at the markets. Are they going up? Are they going down? What's happening in South America with trade? Are they having a good year, a bad year? What are the exports looking like for some of these commodity, like kidney beans, like I mentioned before? Having a pulse on pretty much every market. Fertilizer markets, huge for inputs. It definitely puts other increasing prices into perspective. It takes time to build a dream. Let a farmland manager continue to look after legacy. Like I said before, a lot of these farms that are transitioning right now have that farmer and the landowner has been working the land for 30, 40 years. And it's important to continue that legacy. Like I said, for maybe not this generation if they're not interested, but maybe the next generation or the next generation afterwards. And that's how trust can, help with that. Building that dream where your investment is maybe not be a 401k, maybe it's farmland. That 401k that everyone else has is your farmland, and that's what's going to take you into retirement. We have to be remembered and cognizant of that. So types of land leases that we're going to look at here. Cash lease. I think that's the most straightforward, simple way of a land lease, where you take a dollar amount per acre and you place a value on it and you move forward the contract. Share crop, basically the tenant and the landowner share in the costs it takes to grow a crop, and then that it shares in also the revenue. I think most are familiar with how sharecrop work, and it's a more complicated, kind of a convoluted process that has worked in some situations. Flex lease is something that has been more beneficial for me in some more stable markets where you're running possibly irrigation. Flex leases worked really well where you're creating a base rent and using a flex base formula on the production of that crop and the markets that are currently in place. Cash lease with bonus, that's another popular one. Basically, there's some market triggers on a base rent that kind of step up the cash rent if the market were to reach certain levels. So that way it's not as gradual as like the flex lease where things kind of go to a mark based on XYZ. This, when the markets makes these triggers, it triggers additional rent. Pasture lease, we have different pasture leases, depending on what the land can sustain and hold, whether that be animal units per month or dollar amounts per acre. Added income. We are often approached by cell phone companies, wind turbine companies. Obviously, we talked about, the hunting opportunities that's there. There's some conservation reserve programs, pipelines, diversions. There's a lot of other added value income that can be an additional revenue source for your land. And my final slide here, keep in mind that your land management decisions not only affect your cash flow, but also your land value. Oftentimes we see land that in certain areas, when certain crops are grown on them, they can bring a higher value. For example, another example is in land that is in highly sought after dairy country where manure acres need to be applied. Folks pay landowners to apply manure on their property, which increases the humus and fertility of that land. If that land's not taken care of, for example, with erosion, and there's some erosion issues where certain practices aren't in place, it can also lower the value of your property, which would be detrimental to you as a landowner. So just in wrapping up and in conclusion, there are a lot of opportunities for landowners to hire a land manager, and just a serious consideration in the expertise that, and I'm not just talking about myself, I'm talking about our whole team of land managers here at Pifers. We each have some of our own individual expertise skill sets that we are able to draw information off of each other and really hold a very, very knowledgeable base in agriculture, which I think really makes the whole program even stronger. So I wanted to thank you for listening today and being able to be a part of this. And if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me. My number is 715-305-1989, and my email is ben@pifers.com. Thank you.